All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. I know some of you heard about this kind of last minute. We had intended for this to be a session for our Pierce County Emergency Response Network, and then I just knew that there was so much interest from friends across the state. So we just threw the invitation out wide, and so we're delighted to see so many of you. My name is Allison Campbell. I'm the Heritage Outreach Manager here at the State Historical Society. And before I toss it over to our presenter today, to Jerry, I just wanted to make one quick announcement about some programming that we have coming up. At the end of August, the 22nd and the 23rd, we are headed to Walla Walla to do a series of sort of small museum one-on-one workshops out there. So some of the topics we'll be covering over those 2 days is just fundraising basics, membership, database management. Well, let's see what else. We're going to do communications 101, talk about a little bit about messaging and branding and leveraging social media and increasing your engagement. Chris Ehrlich is going to be coming with me, and we'll do an exhibits 101, exhibits on a shoestring kind of workshop. And then I'm going to do a workshop on those pocket response plans that I hope some of you have been working on. So some basics of emergency planning for your museum. Those workshops are all free. If you happen to be on the east side or just looking for an excuse to go out and enjoy some tacos and wine and do a little museum professional development, we'd love to have you join us. Also know that we will continue to offer those workshops either as a full package or individually on the west side of the state. So there will likely be opportunities for you to take advantage of those workshops closer to home. So don't feel like you got to trek out there, but I wanted to mention that. I think that's it, other than, hey, would everybody just introduce yourself in the chat? And remember to stay on mute. I think as questions come up, we're going to start out maybe just having you put your questions in the chat so that I can kind of help facilitate that Q&A. If there are similar questions, I might just be able to package them as a single question for Jerry. So throw those in the chat, but then if we kind of get comfortable and things kind of feel like they're rolling along, I may just invite people to unmute and go ahead and ask your questions directly. So there's Shelley. I am super excited to introduce you to my new best friend, Jerry Rice. I met Jerry at our Arts and Heritage Day in Olympia, and then came to find out that he is the insurance broker for lots of wonderful museums here in Washington. He is a broker for Hub International, soon to be based in Tacoma, although I think he serves a big area of our state. And he has a passion for nonprofits, which is so exciting. I know you all have questions about and often come to me with questions about insurance, and it's just a real blind spot for me. I don't really understand how it works in terms of what nonprofits need and with our collections, what kind of coverage is recommended. So I'm so thrilled that Jerry can be here. He's got, I think, a little bit of information to share in a slide deck, and then really going to open it up for your questions. I am going to record it, so you will be welcome to share the recording with your colleagues, your fellow board members, your staff. And it'll go up on our YouTube channel, so it'll be there if you need to share the link. So with all of that, we have 28 folks in the Zoom, and Jerry, I'm going to just let you take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Allison, first of all, thanks to you and the Society for this time. Just like to put a quick caveat there. This is not a solicitation for services. This is absolutely a passion for mine. I came to the insurance industry just over 2 years ago, and I spent 27 years in hospitality with Marriott Hotels. And in fact, my first customer at Hub International was a customer that was a museum for me at Marriott. So in those 20 some odd years at Marriott Coast to Coast, I served on about 20 boards of directors. So where a lot of you all sit at on a day-to-day basis is where I was, a business person who purchased insurance, but didn't exactly maybe understood how those principles of insurance really apply to my organization or the board of the organization I was representing or supporting. So I'll go through a quick deck. Some of this may be remedial for some of you all, but I want to go through some simple topics of things that I go through with the most of my museum and nonprofit clients in the insurance space. So again, I'm Jerry Rice, and I work with Hub International Insurance. Hub happens to be the 5th largest brokerage in the world. It's a North American-based company with over 15,000 employees. And currently we place about $60 billion a year in insurance premium for our clients. We organize in verticals, and we insure everything from, no lie, museums to widget factories and every doggone thing in between. So it's an interesting job, and I learn something new every day. But let's talk about museums and nonprofits specifically today, if we might. Some of the common coverages that we talk about in the nonprofit sphere are on the page right now. It's like a daunting list of things, but depending on the size of your organization, the size of your endowment, the size and complexity of your collection, and sometimes the makeup of your board and your facilities depends on which one of these coverages really will apply to you and what you will need based on your programmatic endeavors and what you do in your particular business or your particular organization. But the first thing first is I call it the base model insurance policy. It's commercial general liability. It's the thing that every business needs to be salient and taken care of. And I put a definition on the screen for you and some of the things that are covered by commercial general liability, but that's basically ensuring that if someone gets hurt on your property or you do something to someone, that your organization, your buildings, your property, and your sales are covered from lawsuits that stem from any of those types of things. Let's say slip and fall in your museum. Let's say we didn't put a wet floor sign out, or someone in our parking lot, there was a pothole in the winter and we didn't cover it and someone fell in the pothole and tripped and hurt themselves. That is what your commercial general liability goes through. It also takes into account things like libel, slander, and some of the work that you do within your organization as well. Again, it's the base model policy for anybody in commercial insurance. It protects your building, it protects your environment, and protects your general liability of the work that you're doing. The second part would be commercial property. Just what it says, it's property insurance. This is the insurance that will cover any of the buildings that you own, and also any of the premises that may be rented to you. Because even though you may not own your building, you're leasing it from someone, and a lot of organizations like to cover things like their business personal property that's inside of the building, anything they added for as far as tenant betterments and improvements. A lot of times I've seen museums take beautiful raw spaces that were at great value to them, and they spent a lot of their money and their capital renovating those spaces. Tenant betterments and improvement within commercial liability insurance within the property side will cover you on what you did to your building and the things that you own inside of your building, whether you own that building or whether you lease that building. It's to cover all the things inside that belong to you and to your organization. The next part I'll talk about is the business owner policy, and it's called a BOP. Many of you small museums that maybe don't do more than a $1.5 million a year in annual sales may have a BOP. The difference between a single insurance carrier and insurance brokerage is very clearly, I sit in between you and insurance carriers. I don't work for one carrier. I work with 2,000 carriers on a daily basis to find the right insurance company for your business and your risk. Be that a hotel, a museum, or again, a widget factory that I insure in Woodinville right now. It's me trying to find, in my company, finding the best deal and the best coverage based on what your particular needs are. And those needs change all the time. Your revenues go up and go down. Your business increases, it goes up and down. Your collection expands and goes in. You have things that come in that belong to others. So the needs of your business are constantly changing. And what we do as brokers is step between you. But some of you all may be using your run-of-the-mill Main Street America Farmers Agent or Liberty Mutual Agent or State Farm Agent to write your business insurance. And it's not a bad thing. Sometimes we place policies with those companies just as those brokers do. And you will find that there are called a BOP insurance policy, which then takes into account all the things that we had before. The commercial general liability, the commercial property, and then business income insurance, or BI as we call it. Business income insurance is insurance so if there was a problem with your operations, if for any reason you had to close your doors and you could not ring your cash registers or get your money and your funding in, how would you pay for your overhead, your salaries, and your other fiscal responsibilities? And that's what business income insurance does. It literally replaces your income by month or by quarter or by year, depending on how you set the policy up. Should there be a case at a time when you could not get your normal revenues, ergo COVID, which was a really big thing in our industry. Commercial auto insurance, for some of you all that have vehicles attached to your museums or your cultural attractions or your landmarks. I put on the top right-hand side what the minimums are in the state of Washington for automobile insurance. It's $25,000 for bodily injury per person, $50,000 per bodily injury liability, and $10,000 property damage limit per accident. I'll give you a very good example why that might not be a good thing. My Nana, I'm from a little small town called Welford, South Carolina. And about 2 years ago, my Nana was at 7-Eleven. She thought the car was in reverse, but it was in drive. And Nana drove through the front door of the 7-Eleven. Thankfully, Nana's grandson is a commercial insurance broker. Nana has $1 million on her car and $1 million umbrella coverage. The repair costs, when we were all done with the 7-Eleven, reached about $210,000 from my grandmother driving that car, that blue Buick LeSabre, through the front door of that 7-Eleven convenience store. Funny as that was, it's a real story. If my grandmother had carried the minimum liability limits in the state of South Carolina, which are very close to these Washington limits, my family and my grandmother would have been indemnified and would have to pay 7-Eleven for the damages to their properties, as well as anything else that happened in the process. Thankfully, there were no patrons in the store. The clerk there did not get hurt, and all she caused was physical damage to the building. But they did close the 7-Eleven for 4 days while they did structural checks to make sure that Nana didn't destroy the integrity of the 7-Eleven. So, commercial auto insurance is something people often don't think about. But if you have a logo on your building, a logo on your van, a logo on your truck, when people see companies and organizations, they automatically think that you have a lot of money. They don't know that nonprofits, you spend 80% of your time raising money, not giving it away. But people love to sue when they see a logo. And so I say at all times, we cover our cars for no less than $1 million on the commercial side. And recently we started to ratchet those limits up and use other mechanisms to give people more leverage in the commercial auto zone, because we see a lot of litigation as of recently in that particular arena, commercial auto. Workers' compensation and stopgap. This is going to be something that's going to throw some of you all off if you do not have employees. Every employer, of course, is required to provide workers' compensation for their employees. There are 4 states in this country, Washington State, Wyoming, North Dakota, and Ohio, that are what I call rogue states. You cannot buy your workers' compensation from me or from Hub or from any other brokerage or any other insurance company. You must buy that coverage in this state through the L&I departments. So all of you who have employees, you have an L&I account, you buy your workers' compensation through the state. However, the state is concerned with one thing, and I applaud them for this. They want to ensure that every single employer who is registered is providing for the health and safety of their employees. So what workers' compensation and L&R and our friends in Olympia will sell you is a Part A policy. What they will not sell you is the second side of that. They will take care of the employees. However, what happens if one of your employees happened to have gotten hurt on the job, and it was your fault? Or they got injured on the job and it was your fault, or they have a long-term disease from the job and it was your fault as an employer. Maybe you didn't know, or maybe you did know there was asbestos in the building, or a safety violation wasn't being taken care of. The part of the insurance that has stopgap covers you for those lawsuits. The state of Washington will not take care of your lawsuits against you. They're only concerned with the health and well-being of Washington workers. And that's why stopgap coverage is very important. It's a simple endorsement on a commercial general liability policy. Every broker knows about it. It costs very, very little, but it does give you a level of protection that every employer should have in any state. Stopgap workers' compensation insurance. And the last small piece I'll talk about is commercial umbrella. We talked about a few seconds ago, I said, what happens if you run into the house and it's $1 million to fix it with granny running into the 7-Eleven? There's a way to expand your coverage on your current policies without upping those numbers. Good example, commercial general liability usually writes at $1 million on incident and $2 million aggregate per year. We talked about commercial auto being $1 million per year in claims that you can get for that. That's how we cover the vehicles in our company. Your property is going to be covered at whatever the replacement cost or the actual cash value of your property is. But there are ways to expand those limits. And one of the best ways is through commercial umbrella coverage. What commercial umbrella coverage does is just that. We take your policies that are underneath it, your general liability, your auto, we take your stopgap. We can even take things we'll talk about later, directors' officers coverage, and we put an umbrella over it, which means that we expand the limits of those particular policies by however much you want to up your umbrella. I've got clients who have a $1 million umbrella. I have clients with a $15 million umbrella or excess policy, depending on, again, what they see their potential for risk is and what they have seen claims in the past. Any of this stuff that I'm going through, please know that you can always email me and we'll talk about it. I'm happy to answer any questions at any time. Giving general information and education is something that I love to do. I also talk at a clip, so I'm hoping I'm not going through these slides too fast for you all out there in media land.
I turned on the closed captioning, Jerry, so people don't miss anything.
Thank you so much. We talked about already commercial general liability, commercial property, workers' compensation, and umbrella. Those are the base things in any business. I want to talk about a few other pieces of coverage that do apply specifically within the nonprofit community that you may or may not know about and understand what their coverage meanings are and how they help you and your organization. The first being directors and officers coverage, or D&O, as we call it in insurance. This insurance protects the board and your board directors, and sometimes your executives, your CEO and your COO for legal expenses or decisions that you make that might be included in a lawsuit. Here's a good example. When you sign a contract as an organization, a lot of times contractual obligations are voted through by your board of directors. When you raise your hand and say, I, as a board member, you've now made yourself responsible for the decision and the contract that was made. I have seen firsthand where things went wrong in contract disputes or challenges, and then boards of directors were then assumed as a liable party because you signed off on the work and the recommendations of an executive director. Be that innocent work or nefarious, doesn't matter. Again, I want to go back to the fact that we live in a very litigious society. And unfortunately, my job every day is to anticipate someone not being honest, truthful, or forthcoming, or trying to do something to harm or impugn the reputation of an organization that we insure. So I have to think on the bad side of life because it's my job to. I can't protect a business or an employee if I don't know what's going on or project what could go on. So directors and officers coverage, mismanaged funds, failure to meet regulatory standards, failure to perform official duties. Again, I'm working with a nonprofit right now that has a contract dispute, and the contractor is not only suing the organization, but the board of directors because the board signed off on it and it's in the actual meeting minutes. Professional liability insurance generally applies to professionals, doctors, lawyers. However, in the museum space, we have some people who may have daycares within their nonprofits, nurseries and nonprofits. There are some pieces of that, and that's what we do those. There are actually nonprofits out here to do several different things, and some of you all do dual roles depending on where you are in your states. And please know I'm speaking from a 50-state perspective because I do work with clients all over the country. So I've got a client in New Jersey that has a small museum component, but also has corporate has a low-income housing and a daycare center. So for them, I also do have daycare center insurance, and I have professional liability for those daycare providers to make sure that if they're coming in contact with children, that we have that covered as well. We'll talk about it a little bit more later. Professional liability insurance. The biggie is in front of your face right now. And I'll probably take a moment and stop and stay here for a moment. but it's sexual abuse and molestation insurance. If you have any exposure with children in the work that you do, kids museums, camps, summer programs, work in the community where you go to schools and you see children, this is a must for you. This is becoming one of the most difficult lines of coverage for us to find for any of our clients. I want you to think about the Catholic Church, Boy Scouts of America. And if you think about the challenges they've had as organizations, you'll know why. Those were 7, 8, and 9-figure lawsuits that are still out there and are still being negotiated across the country. That has what we call shrank the appetite for carriers or insurance companies, we call them carriers, to write sexual assault and molestation insurance. It's also driven the cost of SAM, or sexual assault and molestation insurance, up exponentially in the last 48 to 60 months. I know that most of the time in the insurance world, if you all deal with insurance, you usually only see your broker maybe once a year around renewal time. They don't talk to you during the year, and you get sick for a meeting or you get a renewal notice, and there's this increase of a 50% on a line of coverage. I like to explain that sexual assault and molestation, for anyone who has it or is going to get it, is going to continue to be, along with cyber liability, one of the most expensive things to have for your business. But I repeat, if you do have a child exposure, it also is not just the child exposure. Those working with kids, it's the defense cost. And currently, we're showing legal fees on sexual assault and molestation reaching our clients into the $200,000 range. And these are, even though we're settling these cases, we're still finding we're getting $200,000 in legal fees, depending on the municipality and depending on the opposing counsel that we're going against. Most sexual assault and molestation policies are currently written like commercial general liability on $1 million basis. I began moving my smaller museums that have children exposures up to the $2 and $3 million basis, and putting an umbrella on top of that to expand those limits even more. Only because you may not have ever had an exposure, guys, but it only takes one time to have one and really impact your bottom line. Again, yes, it does. It covers Keon, I saw your note. It does. It covers the elderly. It also covers, I have some nonprofits that work with developmentally disabled persons, and it covers those persons as well. Anytime you have a thought there might be a sexual abuse or a molestation claim, it will cover that as well. It's a big coverage. It's becoming really expensive, but I also want you all to know it's becoming very, 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 very important to have if you have a child at risk. Especially, people don't think about things like day camps in the summer. Well, you can have 100 kids running around there. It only takes one parent to decide that maybe something that they had or heard about during the day was not appropriate, and for them to seek legal counsel against you or your organization for, again, something that may have been innocent or maybe not even will be proven at all. It doesn't take anything but a phone call to file lawsuits. It's the only way I'm going to say that one, Allison. Beyond that, let's talk about fiduciary liability insurance. Fiduciary liability insurance really has a lot to do with those of you all who administer things like pension plans, 403Bs, retirement plans. These are making sure that as you are, and employee benefit plans, that as you are administering your plans to your employees, that you are being fair, consistent, and legal in how you administer your plans, that you're taking care of those funds. We find now that most nonprofits don't manage their own 403Bs anymore. You all using third-party managers, which is great because that indemnifies them for that and not you. But if you do your own 401k, 403B, you have your own benefits, there are some fiduciary pieces that you have out there that will be necessary for you in a larger environment. We don't put this usually on small insurance, small museums unless they're part of a risk pool. You've heard of those, like NPIP, the nonprofit insurance pool here in Washington, which handles a great deal of our nonprofits, and probably some of you on this call. And then the NIA, the Nonprofits Insurance Alliance, and that's out of Ventura, California, another pool of programs that helps nonprofit organizations across the country meet their insurance needs. So fiduciary may be new for you, but it's a great topic to talk about. The next will be crime and fidelity. This really has to do with making sure that everyone's honest. The only crime and fidelity, honestly, breaches I've ever seen or lawsuits have been because an employee took something. a CFO, a controller, maybe in a small nonprofit where you didn't know that the person you've been trusting with your books for 20 years, who's been there doing a great job, may have been doing something nefarious behind the scenes, and maybe the executive director or the board was not aware of it. Because we're all humans, and nobody on this line that I know of is a CPA, and I'm definitely not a CPA or a JD or a lawyer. So sometimes things happen. Better to cover yourself and know that we have to be careful with everyone in our environment and who all we trust. One of the things you'll find is as insurance goes through, they may ask you in the process, do you background check? Do you credit check your employees? How do you make sure that you're taking care, you're hiring people who would be good for the organization and would do good work? Same thing, we talk about sexual assault and molestation. You may be asked, what are your procedures? Do you have a protocol? What happens if there's reporting? Are there already plans in place? And they'll ask for those manuals and procedures because the insurance company wants to make sure that they're insuring a good risk and that you're doing your due diligence as the organization, the ED, the board, or the fiduciary to do what you can do to run the organization legally, morally, and ethically. I'll stop here for a second with cyber liability. Like sexual assault and molestation, cyber liability is becoming a very, very hot topic. Not because of anyone doing anything right, but for people out there in the world who do a lot of things wrong in the cyber land. In 2003, we found that the average computer breach, no lie, was over $4 million in cost when it was all done. When there's a breach of your computer system, you have to think about what's on your server. You've got likely employee information, social security numbers. You might have donor information, donor credit cards. You might have all your board information. Who knows what you have on your servers? All of those things and all of those people are exposed the moment someone reaches your system. And as a business, you are legally required, should there be a breach, not only to indemnify those people then and make them right if something happens in their life, but the bigger piece of cyber insurance now, guys, is the fact that now you have to look over their accounts and their credit reports for the next 4 to 5 years based on where your municipality is and what your state says their law is. And if you think about a breach, say at the Washington State History Museum, the big one on Pacific Place, gosh only knows how many names are in that database. Could you imagine having 50,000 people that you had to pay for LifeLock or Life Alert for 5 separate years after a breach, and then make them whole if there is a breach anytime within that time frame? These days, I'm recommending that all of our clients, no matter what your industry, is using a third-party data service or have someone with a strong IT backbone on your team. Allison, I see your hand raised.
Sorry, that was not very elegant timing on my part. First of all, that cyber liability thing is going to keep me up at night. Do you mind, Jerry, going back to the slide right before we had a couple of questions?
Go ahead.
Was this? Yes. Okay. So Carrie was asking if this is also sometimes called employee dishonesty policy, or is
yes.
it something different? And then Janet was wondering if this also applies to volunteers in addition to employees. And we have a lot of probably questions about where volunteers fit into all of this coverage.
Janet, great point and a great segue in the middle of this. This is all about your broker or your insurance agent writing up who you are in the very beginning. My job as a broker is to craft a story about who you are and what you do to an insurance carrier and want them to take your business. And I generally want them to do it for lower than what you're paying right now. I'm doing my job, but that's just me. But it's all about how you file applications. Do you let the insurance company know that there are volunteers? Do you list all of your special events where volunteers will be taking money, your fundraisers, your everything down to your raffles? Does the insurance company know the entire scope of your operations? And that's the job of your broker. One of the things that we do is we ask how many volunteers you have. We do an event schedule when we do submissions to make sure that every insurance company that we write with knows the exact exposure that you might have on the volunteer side. From the nonprofit perspective, sometimes 50% of your lift is by volunteers. Thereby, they're acting as surrogates and agents of your organizations on a regular basis. And we understand that, and so do the insurance companies. If they know it, Janet, in the original submission, if it's out there, then they're indemnifying and they're covering you for it. It's when they don't know and something happens later on, or you or me or your other broker, whoever they may, didn't tell them, that they can say they want to deny a claim because they didn't know. And that's why being upfront and making sure the picture that we paint about you in the very beginning, that they know every single facet of your operation.
Great, thanks. Sorry to make this.
Oh, no problem. But back to cyber. Cyber's a thing. I will not lie. I have a cyber exposure right now I'm dealing with, and it's a little messy. We're at 7 figures and we're climbing. I don't say any more than that. But it happens every day. And just like sexual assault and molestation and DNO, I would say these are 3 things that boards of directors in the nonprofit sector, they sleep on. They sleep on their DNO, they sleep on their SAM, and they sleep on their cyber liability. And every single time I've seen this happen, for what was pennies long term, I've seen organizations get some really big hits because of it. So those are 3 things. If nothing else, please check your DNO policies, see how much they're for, see what they cover, and not just what they cover. Read your declarations page and your exclusions. And insurance policies has lots of inclusions, but you have to really be careful about is the exclusions. And every single one of them has a ton of fine print. I know you're not lawyers, so make your broker get on the phone like this and walk through them with you so you understand that you may have be excluded for X, Y, or Z in your policy, but you need to know what you're covered for and what you're not. Insurance is not a sexy topic at all by any means, but it's a necessary evil for the work you do. My goal is for every penny that you all take in to try to go back to the work you're doing to help people, to shape minds, to restore things, to keep things from our past preserved so that the next generation of tiny humans can understand from whence we came and what we're doing next and how we evolve as people. And I don't like seeing nuisance claims or paperwork violations or $100 for an endorsement costing an organization, any type of cash or money. Lastly, we'll talk about inland marine liability. And this is where we deal with your collections. Your collections that may be with you, your collections that may be in transit, things that may be loaned to you. A lot of what you all do, especially in the community-based organizations, you have people who give you their own prized treasures so that you can share them with other people in our communities and they can see things from our past that we don't have any knowledge of. Well, some of those things are priceless, and you need to make sure that your inland liability, your inland marine coverage is substantial to, number one, cover your possessions, and also make sure that either that or your commercial general liability policy has declarations for items of others in your possession. So if there is a freak water pipe at your museum and a watercolor that's 100 years old is destroyed, you can make that person whole, because I'm sure they'll want to be made whole because they loaned it to you. Or things that you may be moving in exhibition. What do? A lot of my museum clients have things in storage. You all have a lot more storage than I ever thought in the museum world out there. You all have, if people knew what you all had stuck in storage buildings, it would be crazy. But I have a lot of that.
Very
What you say?
Storage. There's never enough storage for museums.
I did not know, guys. I was like, you have 3 different storage? But yeah, 3. And it's like, sometimes we have 4. And I realized there's a whole piece of that. Also, with regards to inland marine, make sure that if you are one of the organizations that allows other people to donate, that you've got some clear contracts and releases stated for what you give that person that you're getting their stuff, getting the item from. Make sure that you have a clear line. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you how to make that happen. I would assume that you should go to your own counsel because I can't give advice on that. But knowing what the rules of engagement are when you borrow something from someone is very clear and helps us on our side should there be any type of loss on that side. Again, if you have not valued your collection as of late, I would do that. I was working with a small museum last week, and the first thing we're doing is valuing their collection. We look at their liability, we look at their GL, their property, or their property in the marine, and we found to be substantially undervalued based on some new pieces they picked up in the last 24 months that the previous insurance broker had not scheduled on their schedules. So just make sure that you're looking at your values on a regular basis, that if you're borrowing from people, you have a clear 2-way contract that he holds you harmless or has something spelled out. And number 3, that you actually do have this in the marine coverage to cover you for anything that might happen that's in your possession and your collections.
Hey, Jerry, wait, can I stop you? Sorry.
Yes.
Can we linger here for a minute?
Let's linger.
I have a feeling this is sort of a crux of a lot of questions. First of all, a question that came from our colleagues at the Tacoma Historical Society back when you were talking about commercial property insurance was really just sort of obviously the reason this is so complicated is because museum collections are irreplaceable, right? Like, sure, we can put a value on them, but they can never be replaced. And so it's sort of like, and we've seen that we've had tremendous losses at museums in Washington in the last few years. So I guess just if we could like pause and maybe invite folks to ask questions both about sort of like, when clarify commercial property insurance, and then when this inland marine. I mean, I think I understand that this inland marine liability is when things are leaving your home and being lent out, or things are being borrowed, but just sort of some clarity here on that. And then I know, and I think Maggie from our collections can also kind of help with this issue of valuation and how that should work in a museum and what kind of the ethical guidelines are for valuation. So maybe we'll start there. Maggie.
So I'll start with the commercial property. I'm sure that no one on the phone really knows how to even value your property, but I'll tell you how we do this in the insurance business. I start with going to your county website, and I pull your millage and see how the city or county who does your property taxes is assessing your business. I then take modeling based on your zip code and like buildings. We also look at listings or like listings, and then we pull back what it would cost to replace your building. And that's how we get replacement costs on a building. It's about not only what your building's worth, but today what it would cost to replace your building should there be a loss. And don't take it the wrong way, guys. We insure buildings in the insurance industry, unfortunately, based on the fact that we assume that they may burn to the ground. And what would it take us to start from scratch and build you over? I want to be very clear. During COVID, we saw commodities go through the roof. And we have also seen the replacement costs or building costs per square footage go. Whereas 3 or 4 years ago, I guarantee most of you all were having policies for your commercial building probably written at $250, maybe $300 per square foot for replacement cost. We're seeing values in some areas upwards of $600-700 per square footage. And let me tell you why. Depending on, can you get the goods and services to you? It's hard to get replace a building in Hawaii if it burns down. Or where's your labor market? In my home state of South Carolina, it's non-unionized. But for my clients in New York City, they have a higher cost of replacement because all of the workers, all the trades, and all the construction companies are unionized. And for the labor of those workers is generally about 50 to 60% higher than the average tradesperson outside of those particular zones. And so we start there. With regard, you can also find that on the commercial property is maybe where some of you all may find your coverage for your fine arts and your collections. It can be what we call scheduled. It can be called BPP, business personal property. And what your existing broker can do is write down and say, here's what we have. We've got copiers and office supplies valued at $60,000. We've got XYZ pieces of museum of exhibit valued at $200,000. So it can be scheduled on your commercial property insurance. And some people don't have in the marine if they're not moving things in and out on a regular basis. In the marine was just that. It was created a million years ago when people were transporting things across the water. If they lost something on the way, we just taken that whole principle and just moved it right into insurance. But you can find your collection on your property, or you could have in the marine. Most mid to larger museums do use in the marine coverage because it gets way more granular. I don't want to get into it, but there's so many things I could put on the inland marine policy to cover you, way more so than on a commercial general liability policy, because inland marine is so specialized to what you all do. And to me, it's very interesting and very important for the museum industry.
Yeah,
another question? Any more, Allison? Give me some more.
No, Jerry, that was great. That kind of helps me kind of understand. And it sounds like for most of our small and mid-sized organizations that the commercial property insurance coverage for your collection is sufficient if you're not borrowing and lending.
Yeah.
What is sort of your advice on this issue of valuation? Obviously, with the property valuation, I get that there's information that you can cull from the county and from property records, but for all of our collection stuff, Maggie, where do you start with valuation?
Thank you, Jerry. This is so helpful, I think, for everybody too. So big thanks, big thanks. I think the one thing that you all need to think about is if you ever have to file a claim, you can do your valuations in-house, but if you ever have to file a claim, they're going to say prove it. And it can't be that this evaluation was done by my sister who's an appraiser and did it for us for free. They're not going to like that, right? It's going to need to be a third party outside person who is not going to have any, biases or prejudices. We're hampered in the museum field because for a long time, kind of from the 50s to the 80s, lots of smaller museums were taking in collections without doing any sort of checking to make sure they were being appraised, and they were highly valuing them and giving people huge tax deductions. So that's why we have the laws that we have today. It's because people were very much taking advantage of this. It also might mean that if you were gifted something in that time period and you have an evaluation from an appraiser, it could be way overinflated because no one was checking on this thing. So it can get really, really granular with insurance. Another example I use is it was a claim because a case got put on top of a piece of pottery, like it slipped when they were putting the bit on, and it got a tiny chip in it, and it had to go to conservation, and they didn't pay it because the person holding the bit was not a collections team member. They asked who was that person. It was a janitorial staff. They didn't cover the claim. So all of these things, I think, are things to really consider. I'm not saying that here at the State Historical Society, we have a professional valuation for everything. We don't. We have way too much material for that. But for all of the things that get asked to go out, or we do for those, and they're under policy as such. So Jerry, I think this is just really helpful for everybody, and it's really good to hear from you and to be able to ask questions. So,
and Maggie, please understand, some of my experiences are not here in Washington. It could be Montana or my clients in Texas, because I spend a month in Texas every year. But I also have found that a lot of our smaller museums and cultural sites don't catalog very well. And so if you don't have a catalog of what you have and you don't have a picture of it, then if you have a claim, our claims team is we're beat before we get to the race, because I've got nothing to show what it was. It's not written down anywhere. It's not pictured. So how do I even come up with a valuation on something you say you lost that we never had in anybody's files anywhere? There are some, but I have seen some really old museums which are very interesting. They've got the old files where they literally took stuff in years ago and took Polaroids of it. And they've got Polaroids to make sure they have pieces of their collection at least cataloged. You have to know what you have before anyone's going to give you a claim or pay a claim on it. Yes, ma'am, Allison.
Said Jerry, yes. Question for both of you. Imagining a scenario of a smaller museum that doesn't probably have a complete inventory of their full collection, because honestly, who does?
Mm-hmm.
And can't necessarily afford to bring in an appraiser to appraise the full collection or whatever. What would you ever recommend to somebody that they pay for an exceptional individual to come in and do evaluation on the 5 items that if they were damaged from smoke or water or mold, they would want to pay a conservator to come in, no matter what the cost of that conservation work, because those are such core items for the collection? Could you really narrow and include that in a policy that these 5 are 5 most precious things that we would spend any money in the world to make sure that they were rescued or salvaged from an incident? Does that kind of make sense?
Absolutely. And we do, as I said, we schedule those items. We literally write them out. X, Y, Z item. There are some schedules I've seen, guys, that are 200 and 250 pieces long in large museums that have really big collections in large cities. They're not mine, but things I've looked at policies. And I've seen when they had 250 scheduled pieces of art because it was just what they wanted. Also, scheduling again tells the insurance company, here's what we have. If you're scheduling a lot and you miss something, it's also a good indication to the insurance company that you really are keeping your hands on what you've got. And they see you as being a bit of a more, having some skin in the game versus expecting them to come through and indemnify you for a loss and you not really done any work on your side to protect yourself, because it all starts with you. I can try. I probably do more than I should sometimes, just because I'm nutso in some ways, in a really good way. But you should schedule all of those things, only because if you lose it, it's gone. And again, even if you have a small commercial general liability policy and commercial property, write in that thing artwork, or write in pottery. Take it and put that stuff in little buckets and say, I've got 25K in pottery, I've got 100K in painting. So at least if there happens to be a claim, you can say, you know, we told you in the schedule that we've got pottery and we've got, so at least an insurance company can't play and do this number with you should you have a claim. At least you did your best effort and you made a fiduciary choice to try to let them know what you had in house and what their exposures were as you as their insured.
Yes, perfect, Jerry. Getting lots of great feedback because this is so much wonderful information. I just want to, I think that we've kind of answered this, and Elizabeth and Jessica, feel free to unmute if you have additional questions, but sort of just going back to that, is there a difference in the policy for covering artifact recovery, salvage, conservation versus if it's a total loss and something that you have to try and replace in your collection by getting something like or similar? Like, is there a difference in how that's written up in the policy? Or I'm not sure that's
no, but you want to look at things like that. For that, we look at things like your property policy, looking what your water loss is, looking what your sewer backup is. When people look at things like, I insure a lot of people that have things in storage. Well, what happens if the storm drain, the storage facility isn't correct and you're 20 miles from your museum and the water rushes back up into that storage space and you lose artifacts or things you have in storage there? If we don't have your property correct, and again, scheduling your storage unit as your property, you could then lose those items because they weren't scheduled appropriately. Now, we put the fine arts there, but then we start what I call the splitting hairs of just what you said. What's a complete loss? And again, so many times in your world, unlike most of my other clients, if something gets broken in your world, you all try to fix it. And you all have people out there in this world that can fix these things. It might be one person in a three-state radius. There's somebody who can help you. And you have to make sure you give yourself the most coverage to say, this may need to be repaired. And that's what for your large pieces, I would schedule those large pieces. It doesn't have to be your whole collection. But again, even if you're a small community museum and your volunteers are doing 80% of your list, just say, what do I think percentage of our collection is that's pottery? Or again, paintings, or what is writings, and kind of how do I bucket that out? It doesn't have to be as granular, because usually, with all due respect, if you don't have the staff to be that granular, you likely don't have the assets that are so expensive that we would have that kerfuffle should there be a claim of any sort. Not to minimize anyone's collection, but just to be kind of blunt about where it goes on that. Some things are easier replaced than others.
Right, like, I mean, I've visited many of your small museums. Lots of you have 1950s, the curling irons that sit on your head and do your curls, right? Those things that are awesome. I'm fascinated by them. There are lots of those out there, right? If that was lost in an incident, it could be replaced unless that thing belonged to the first female mayor of your town. And, you know, like, if there's a story where it's all kind of tough, right? Because if there's an incredible story that goes with that object, then it truly is irreplaceable. And you're going to want to do everything you can to conserve that. I just backing up really quick to a question about D&O insurance, Jerry. Linda was wondering, and I'm sure this is something that an organization would work with their broker on, but is that coverage like really scaled? So for a small board, I mean, it would be kind of, you know, the cost of that is sort of flexible with the size of the organization. And
it is. Just like your commercial property insurance, the driver for that will be the replacement cost on your building. Your commercial general liability insurance, which is what we call the base model, that's driven on your sales, your number of employees that you have, and kind of what your exposures are. You can right size that. If your sales are so low, they will see that look at D&O policies as almost like an offshoot of that. If you have very little exposure with sales, very little exposure with property, then the rule of thumb, you probably have very little exposure on the D&O side. And so they will cut your rate down based on what your exposure is. And a lot of that is driven by your sales numbers again, or by what the value of your collections are in certain cases, not many at all, but mostly by what your sales are. So you probably have, you're a small museum, you likely able to go to NPIP, and they're able to do something like your general liability and your D&O for, honestly, probably, I've done D&O policies for $500, guys. And to think, I got a small museum, $1 million in coverage for their board for $500. Because if you're taking in $300,000 or $400,000 a year, what are the chances someone's going to sue a small rural board? It's very, very, very low. And the insurance carriers do understand that. However, if you're a large museum in a center city that has a massive endowment, a big board with lots of names on it, and also don't forget, think about the wealth on your board. I say this on a regular basis, and you don't want to dig too far into your board, but let's be real. We have board members for a few reasons. We want board members that can help us with our mission, that can physically help us volunteer, or who help us fundraise. And with all due respect, we need those high dollar board members who can bring and coalesce money to keep our organizations going. But also with that, don't forget, the more money you have on your board, the more you should look at your D&O policy. Again, because the decisions that the board make can then come back on them because they are an official arm of the organization. So it depends on that. I've got some boards that do have some local tech money on them, and we've changed their D&O policies, and we've increased those limits just based on the net worth of some of the board members. And then those boards, those board members come to us and say, first thing they ask is, what is the D&O policy like for the organization, and what are the limits and how are they structured? I have one board that I know of that has $200 million in D&O on it because of the net worth of the actual board members. But you probably guess which one that is, and you expect why that is. So yes, it does matter, but usually your insurance company will scale that up and down based on your commercial general liability, your operations. They know if you got a big building and a big budget, and they know if you have a small building because they see your financials.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, great. That's, I think, really helpful too, just because we have organizations of all different sizes here. It is. We only have about 8 minutes left. I had a feeling that we could go on and on about this topic, but I want to give you a chance, Jerry, to run through any of your additional slides you might have, and then just maybe leave us 5 minutes for extra questions. And if we need to do a part 2 on this, I'm sure if we sweet talk Jerry, he'd come back and answer.
It's just a slide up there about the key business services. Not only does Hub International do commercial insurance, that's what I do. I protect businesses and their assets. We do health insurance, benefits for our employees. We do retirement planning. We do risk and rewards. And so I ask everyone, this is not an endorsement of my company, but when you are picking a broker, please pick a brokerage that has services other than the ability to come by once a year and write a policy for you. If you need training, are there resources there? If you need risk control problems, or you're having issues, are those options there? We've even helped nonprofits. We do HR consulting. So we've gone to some nonprofits that identified some key risks, and we built programs out for them through our HR consulting arms, almost to help them and tick and tie writing their insurance to ensure that as you're building your HR program, as you're scaling your museum, that we're scaling in a way that also identifies you on every single insurance carrier known to man. So that's kind of what we do. Our goal is soup to nuts every day across multiple environments. And again, about us, we're 500 locations. We are now up to over 40 billion in premiums. That slide is incorrect at this point. And last year we grew at a rate of 18%. But I won't lie, last year has been an interesting year. Here's a good note for you all. Transparency is what you want in your broker or your brokerage. Sometimes having difficult conversations are not easy for people like me, but I'd rather have that conversation for you so you knew what you were in face of versus shucking and jiving, as my grandmother would say, the one Nana who drove the car through the 7-Eleven. But every day, you have an option to make a choice. Find a good broker. It does not have to be me. It doesn't have to be Hub, but find someone who cares about you. If you meet with a broker or a brokerage and they have never know anything about your collection, they don't know about what you do, they can't tell you about what you're doing, think to yourself, are they really intrinsically involved or really care about what I'm doing here? And understand that most of my clients work in the $30,000+ a year in premium, but I partner with a girl beside me named Justine, and Justine writes all of my business for anybody who's not spending $30,000 a year, because there's this big gap in small nonprofits versus large. So Hub wants me to go after the big fish. But my problem is I won't leave the little ones behind. It's consternation in my office, but I won't leave anybody behind. I say send everybody a lifeline. So I've now partnered with Justine. Justine had a conversation. I said, Justine, I have a call today. Don't forget, we may get some business off of this. Be ready, because I've got some small museums who may want your tutelage. It's just, it may not be me every day, but I'll always be there. But get yourself under the umbrella of a brokerage of some kind that has options, that has resources, and honestly has the reputation. There's nothing wrong with your Main Street broker at all. They're great people, but they may or may not have the capacity. And don't forget, Alex and I talk about this all the time. One of the reasons I save people money is not because I'm this opining person, but because I belong to such a big company. We have more insurance companies that come to us trying to get our business. The bigger the company is, the more access to carriers that I have. Good example, here in Washington, I have 2,100 insurance carriers we work with just on the commercial side. Now, granted, only about 35 of those I work with in the nonprofit space, but I've got more capacity sometimes than other smaller brokerages have. If you go to Nationwide, they're only going to write you a Nationwide policy. If you go to Safeco, they're only going to write you a Safeco policy. They don't have to be able to compare and contrast you to other markets to make sure you're getting the right coverage and the right pricing for you. And again, your needs could change. One year it could be, Jerry, we need to pull off some of this insurance. I can't make my budget. I have a shortfall. Okay, let's judge it down. But let's be honest about it and have some conversations that we protect you as much as humanly possible. Again, whether you're a big organization or a small one, I am always here. I will always answer emails, except for this week, because I am trying to move right now. And you have my cell phone number. This is what I love doing. It's not always about for me making a commission or selling you something. It's about getting information out in a community that I really love and I adore, and a lot of my friends work with, and I have worked in myself.
Yay, Jerry. Okay. Jerry, will you send me the slide deck in an email so that I can just email it to everybody?
Absolutely.
That'd be great. Before we say goodbye, I think we maybe have time for a question.
Sure.
Jerry, Jerry's email is gonna be on the email that I send out to all of you, so you'll be able to reach out to him directly with any follow-ups. But does anybody want to just unmute and ask a question? Or are we all processing all of that incredible information?
And I know it's power packed. I tried to give y'all as much as I could while we had the time.
No, it was great. It was great. One question I know Nicola had that I think you mentioned it, and I think we just moved on so quickly. How frequently would you recommend people do kind of that evaluation of their collection?
Valuations, just like shopping your insurance, I say look every 36 to 50 to 60 months. If you've gone 5 years without doing one or two things, number one, value your collection, or number two, shopping your insurance around, then you're doing yourself a disservice. Most of you all make zero claims. You pay your bills on time. Your insurance carriers know that. And if you're going to be the person who pays the check every year and doesn't check in, they're going to keep raising those rates up. So my job is to keep an eye on where they're booking you at and then look at other markets. As Allison knows, 65% of my time is spent talking to insurance companies, figuring out who they want for business and at what rates are they placing. So make sure that you're not just sitting there with the same person. I know it might be comfortable, but you could be, number one, not getting the coverage you need for the price you're paying, or honestly paying way too much.
So every 5 years, kind of do a refresh.
Every
right?
5 years, I say do a recount. Don't stay on the same company, and don't stay on the same declarations for more than 5 years.
Okay, that's great advice. All right. Well, gosh, thank you so much, Jerry. I have a feeling people will ruminate and questions will emerge. I do want to mention that Jerry will be in Vancouver next week as a sponsor for this Washington Museum Association conference. So you can corner him there and ask questions. But otherwise, thank you so much. Good luck with the move. We're excited to have you in Tacoma, and we'll see all of the rest of you very soon. I'll send an email out pretty quick with the info. Bye.
Thank you.